Today we are going to talk about the LSA Warp 1 Class D amp. Now, on my channel I've reviewed a few Class D amps. Now, not necessarily because I'm particularly fond of Class D, but rather most manufacturers who have asked me to review their amps happen to be Class D. Like it or not, perhaps it is the future. I know some of you still think the letters associated to an amplifier is the same as the grades on an exam. A for excellent and D for damn, I'm so getting my ass kicked by my mom. Well, as I always say, the world of technology improves at lightning speed, and Class D keeps getting better and better. Now, every time when I get a Class D amp in for review, I cannot help but wonder if this will be that giant leap that I've been waiting for. I wish it sounds different than my last Class D amp. I reached out to LSA because a subscriber of mine suggested I should check out their speakers. Interestingly, LSA asked me to check out their newest Class D amp instead of the speaker. So I was definitely curious because these days, most Class D amps I get in for review are pretty good. It's definitely a step up from the Class D amps of yesterday. No longer do we have that glassy top end, slight dryness, lack of top end extension that's been plaguing like the last generation Class D amps. Today's Class D, some of them, you will have a hard time picking it out from a Class AB amp in a blind test. Sure, there are still some characteristics I wish affordable Class D amps can do better. For example, more body in the mids, more slam in the bass, and so forth. Now the key word here is affordable because a high-end Class D amp has none of those problems. If you have ever listened to the Jeff Rowland top-of-the-line Class D $50,000 power amp, you'll notice right away all the typical problems associated with Class D I just mentioned, right? Glassy top end, linear and slightly thin mid-range, lack of bass muscle, is not present in that $50,000 amp. Now, given that I spent a lot of time with that Jeff Rowland amp, I know what a good Class D amp can do. So every time when I get a new Class D amp for review, I hope it is one step closer to that high-end Class D amp. Now, the LSA Warp 1 for me is a bit different compared to the Class D amps I've recently reviewed, and definitely worth your time. Today, my audio buddies, let me share with you why I think you should give this Class D amp a try, even if you're an anti-Class D audiophile. Just like 70% of my videos, this video is not sponsored. I don't get paid a single penny, nor did they tell me I can keep this unit after the video. So once again, free work. I do it because I believe it truly brings value to my viewers. Well, you can show your support by hitting the like button. The Discovery Warp 1 has been getting lots of positive reviews online for good reason. Currently, it is priced at an introductory price of $1,200 USD. Now, I would recommend you don't wait too long to buy it because once the promotion is over, the price will go up to about $1,500 USD. Rated at 150 watt into 8 ohms, 250 watt into 4 ohm, the Warp 1 has plenty of power to drive any speakers. Some of you are probably yarning, like, oh, 150 watt. Darn, my superbly measured Class D power amp the size of a peanut can output like 1,000 watt. Come on, it's Class D. 150 watt is nothing. No, man, this 150 watt is not your typical Class D flea power 150 watt. I will elaborate on it later. Now, the unit comes with both XLR and RCA input, nice professional finish casing, nice binding post, and just like most Class D amps, weighs less than a mini fridge. Now, according to the website, the Warp 1 uses the Texas Instrument TPA 3255 Class D amp as their initial design inspiration. Does it mean that this is a modified TPA 3255? I don't know. I don't care. Because as I always say, you can put a microwave in the signal change if you want. As long as it sounds good, that is all I care. So, how does it sound? The top end can be extended. Some Class D amps I listen to, perhaps to deal with that glare problem, they roll off the top end a little bit, so they're not as extended. This Warp one, no problem. Mid-range, unlike other Class D amps, happens to have a bit of edginess or texture. Also, unlike most Class D amps, it is a bit on the forward side. Bass is crazy strong, plenty of power, and it can punch. I don't feel the bass is linear, maybe a slight bump, so there's a hint of warmth. This amp, unlike most Class D amp, for me is not neutral. Soundstage and instrument separation is okay. It does go beyond like the speakers, there's good layering, but if you're used to a good Class D amp, that's more of an expectation. So in short, detail, color, slight warm presentation, slight forward mid-range with edges, and really strong punchy bass. To help me evaluate this unit, I had 3 of my audio buddies help me out, Mr. Kanta, Mr. Vintage, and Mr. Quad. So let's start with the negatives. Out of all the audio websites I've visited, I award them the most retro-looking website ever. It is as if they spent all their budget on this amp and had nothing left to spend on their website. They probably asked one of their technicians, to go download a free website creation software from the 80s and pay him with pizza. Next, the unit comes with rubber ring on each feet. Now, since it's not glued to the unit, I lost one of the rubber ring. So just be careful. Now, also, although I did mention it sounds a bit warmer compared to other Class D amp, when I compare it to my Mcintosh 6700 Class AB, right? My Mcintosh definitely has more meat on the bone. So keep that in mind. Now, next out of all of us, Mr. Kanta, who just spent a few hours with it, find it lean sounding in his system. He much preferred the double priced VTV Class D Purify amp with a tube buffer, which I recently reviewed, because he said that one had more meat on the bone, the soundstage is wider, the instrument separation is better, and so forth. Now, this is strange because Mr. Quad, Mr. Vintage, and I did not find it lean sounding. Sure, it was not fat and juicy like the Mcintosh, but it was definitely not lean sounding in our system. So it could be a question of synergy with Mr. Kanta's system. Now, I still share his experience because, that's part of my video. I share the good and the bad. Finally, there was one preamp I tried with the VAC. It's an older VAC tube preamp. And I find the noise floor was really high with that combo. That's strange because it was just with that VAC preamp. So that's all the negative I have to say for this amp. Now, I am going to transition into the positives. The first time when I listened to the Warp one, I heard something different. And I did not know what it was. I did, however, know it is something special, and I told my audio buddy, Mr. Vintage, you have to try this. Turns out Mr. Vintage really liked the Warp one. So when Mr. Kanta said, well, he prefers the VTV Class D Purify amp more because it's more detailed, instrument separation is better, and so forth, Mr. Vintage replied with, well, if that is what Mr. Kanta is chasing after, he can understand why Mr. Kanta prefers the VTV. However, what Mr. Vintage is chasing after with this LSA Warp 1 is its color. So the thing I heard that got me scratching my head, where it is unlike other Class D amp, is that it's not neutral. There's a bit of color to it. The LSA reminds him of his older Sansui amps, and the LSA can get him toe tapping. By the way, Mr. Vintage has owned 21 Sansui amps, so he's familiar with that sound. So for those of you who follow my channel, Mr. Vintage is all about building a neutral system. So actually, you know what Mr. Vintage told me? He knows his system can be too plain for many people. He likes Class D because usually it is neutral. So I challenged him on this. If you find this LSA has a bit of color, why do you like it? I thought you want a neutral sounding system. The answer is because this amp can bring him back to the 70s. He can listen to Led Zeppelin with it. It pairs well with vintage speakers as well as modern speakers. Most Class D amps are too clean and neutral for certain kind of music. You need a bit of roughness if you want to listen to like certain rock music, for example. And remember, I mentioned the mids of this amp have a bit of edginess. Well, it's great for certain kind of music. And I mean it in a positive way. I guess that is why, there's no right or wrong when it comes to audio. Something that measures super good, sounds super clean, might just be too polished for certain people and certain kind of music. I like how Mr. Vintage described it. It brings him back to his disco years with this amp. You see, remember I said the power of this amp is no joke? I meant it. We're so used to seeing 600 watt Class D power that it has lost its meaning. Among my audio buddies, we have this like Chinese term we use for Class D amps. We call it chicken power, wimpy power, when compared to Class AB amp. Sometimes I feel my 100 watt Class AB amp sounds more powerful than my 500 watt Class D amp. Now, we don't know is it because of the power supply, because some Class D amps do have pretty good power. But a lot of the Class D amp lacks that kick when you A/B test it against a good Class AB amp with a toroidal power supply. This LSA, unlike other Class D amp, has the ability to punch you in the gut. That is why perhaps Mr. Vintage said it can bring him back to his disco years. Now this is the part where my experience differs from Mr. Quad. So Mr. Quad drove his Quad 2905 electrostatic speakers with it. He said the LSA had no problem driving his Quad and sounded fantastic. He did, however, notice when compared to his Mcintosh MAC6700, he found the Mcintosh has more authority. Now keep in mind he's driving an electrostatic speaker. At my place, it is a different story. You see, I have the same Mcintosh as him, and given I was so impressed with the power of this LSA with my normal speakers, that I decided to put it under the ultimate torture test. I took out my vintage Dynaudio Compound 4 from the 80s, and I've not seen this speaker for like over half a year. So I brought it out because it is the hardest speaker to drive among all my speakers. Forget it is rated 86 dB 4 ohm. I would not be surprised if it's actually 82 dB. At one point, I even bought this Magnapan MC7300 300 watt power amp to drive it. And even then, I was like, Scotty, man, I need more power. So when I A/B test my current 200 watt MAC6700 against the LSA Warp 1, guess what? The Warp 1 can punch harder, while I felt the Mcintosh was a bit more loose and fatter in the bass. Well, it was less punchy because, I don't know, maybe the Warp 1's 300 watt really made a difference compared to the 200 watts. I've never heard my Dynaudio Compound fall with that much punch. Let me tell you another story. So this company called Arendal reached out to me asking me to review their speakers. See over here. I think I was the one who asked for the stand mount version because it is much easier for me to bring it around to my audio buddy's place. So they was aware that I'm into 2-channel listening, so they sent me the seal design version. They were concerned that I might not get enough bass because it is a seal design. So they asked if they can send me a subwoofer too. I did not think much about it. Okay, sure. Send me whatever you want. Next thing you know, this 100-pound, 1,200 watt subwoofer with two 14-inch drivers showed up at my place. I was like, WTF? Is there no bass with the stand mount speaker that they have to send me this subwoofer the size of a mini oven? I took a look at the specs of the speakers and I was like, oh, 84 dB 4 ohm, seal design. Yeah, you better have some good power for these speakers, else you're not going to get any bass. But you know what? I have the LSA Warp 1, so I knew I would have no problem. Plug it in, and I was like, oh, plenty of bass. Sure, it does not dig like deep, but the mid bass was good enough that I didn't need a sub. So for music, it was glorious. Now, I'm sure all of you are wondering, Thomas, so is this the solution I've been praying for the Magnapan LRS. I went to Mr. Cantor Place just to test that. Strangely, when I tried it on the LRS, like for just 10 minutes, I was like, not like, oh yeah, this can drive the LRS, no problem. It was more like, yeah, it's okay. Sorry, I didn't spend a lot of time testing it because I was really busy that day. Now, if you guys really want me to drive back to Mr. Cantor Place to test the Magnapan, again, put it in the comments and I'll try to do it, well, unless LSA wants their amp back like right away. I've been keeping it for like, I don't know, half a year. Now, if I do, I will put the results on my community page or on the first comment of this video. Next, this is a non-fatiguing amp with a mid-range that is slightly forward. So for those who are still on the fence on trying Class D because of all the horror stories and urban legend you have read on the recessed mid-range of Class D amps, this has a good chance to change your mind. Now, I do want to clarify, although it has a certain charm of the older amps, it is not vintage sounding. It has all the qualities of modern sounding amps and can drive both vintage and modern speakers no problem. Finally, when I turn on the unit, unlike some Class D amps, there is no pop noise. So, let's wrap it up. I like the fact that the Warp 1 is different than the other Class D amps I've tried. Every time when I get a Class D amp in for review, that is what I'm hoping for. The Warp 1 did not disappoint me and I was really happy that it is 1002. So it is within the reach of many audiophiles. For me, you should choose this amp for its incredible bass performance and if you like a mid-range that is not recessed. The only thing I will caution is that despite not thin sounding, it is still not as full body sounding as some of the Class AB amps I own. Well, maybe 90% there. It sounded great even if you did not use a preamp. I test a lot with my reference Exasound DAC connected directly to it. It also sounded great with the topping D90SE connected directly to it. The performance will improve further if you add a tube preamp to it. So ideally, you would pair it with a tube preamp. There is a 30-day trial period with a 15% restocking fee, so you can try with peace of mind. If you don't like it, you can return it. Alright, that is my impression of the LSA Warp 1 amp. I think, I think that's it for today. So I'll see you next time.
It's not